Hello again, Thoreau fans. Corinne Smith here, talking today about other nature writers, because my premise is once you've read Walden, you may want to move on to find even more books by even more authors who focus their writing on nature. Right? Last time in part 1 I gave you an introduction to the field, and as promised, today I am talking about 7 American authors to move on to once you have read Mr. Thoreau. I believe that these 7 will create a solid foundation for you in this field. Since I know that I may run into some controversy here, although maybe not so much, I invite you to name your own foundation nature books and authors below, and then we'll see how we compare. First up, John Burroughs. Born in 1837, died in 1921, based in New York State around the Catskills and the lower Hudson River Valley, published quite a number of nature essay books like this one, although usually they come bound in dark green cloth. And you can also find newer compilations like this one, The Art of Seeing Things, the Essays of John Burroughs, compiled by Charlotte Zoe Walker. And with Burroughs, I think any selection of his essays will give you a flavor of his writing. If you are a Thoreau fan, then you may want to get a copy of Indoor Studies, first published in 1889. Here he addresses some of the literature of nature and science, and he starts with a 42-page assessment of Henry D. Thoreau. Burroughs had read Walden and A Week on the Concord and Merrimack Rivers, and he had just read through the 4 seasonal volumes of Thoreau's journals that were compiled by H.G.O. Blake. So if you want to get an early take on Henry's writing too, here you go. John Burroughs' own writing about nature can be stirring as well. Here's an example that I marked with 3 stars in the margin when I first read it. And it comes from the essay, The Art of Seeing Things. If I were to name the 3 most precious resources of life, I should say books, friends, and nature. And the greatest of these, at least the most constant and always at hand, is nature. Nature we have always with us, an inexhaustible storehouse of that which moves the heart, appeals to the mind, and fires the imagination. Health to the body, a stimulus to the intellect, and joy to the soul. To the scientist, nature is a storehouse of facts, laws, processes. To the artist, she is a storehouse of pictures. To the poet, she is a storehouse of images, fancies, a source of inspiration. To the moralist, she is a storehouse of precepts and parables. To all, she may be a source of knowledge and joy. John Burroughs. Now, with these 7 authors that I'm showing off today, I'm also going to recommend at least one biography of each one. It has been my experience that after you read their own works, you may want to know more about the person themselves. So you might find biographies too. The one I have at hand most is John Burroughs, An American Naturalist by Edward J. Renehan, Jr. You should know that there is a John Burroughs Association in New York, and they own his slab sides cabin in the woods, as well as a 200-acre nature sanctuary that you can visit. Go see johnburroughsassociation.org. This group also issues a John Burroughs Medal to worthy nature writers every year. You should know that there is also a John Burroughs Natural History Society, which conducts nature-based field trips and events in New York, especially birding field trips and Christmas bird counts. And you can find them at jbnhs.org. You can visit some of his other homes in New York, including the Woodchuck Lodge, which I've been to. It's very cool. And his family home in Roxbury. You can find them online. So, John Burroughs. Next up, John Muir. Born in 1838, died in 1914. Originally from Scotland, with longer stays in Wisconsin, California, and Alaska. You should already know some of his background. I shouldn't have to tell you much more. If you want to focus on California, then you read My First Summer in the Sierra. If you want to focus on Alaska, you go to Travels in Alaska. But please don't forget, oh, and in Travels in Alaska, John Muir is just as overwhelmed by glaciers and snow and ice as Thoreau was by the trees and mountain scenes from the top of Mount Katahdin in Maine. So Travels in Alaska I equate with Thoreau's Maine woods, actually. A good one that you may overlook is A 1,000-Mile Walk to the Gulf, where you can follow Muir on his pedestrian journey from Indiana to Florida. And this is an interesting one if you've never heard from it. So let's get a writing example from My First Summer in the Sierra, where Muir describes squirrels. Don't you just love squirrels? Evidently John Muir did too. I like to watch the squirrels. There are two species here, the large California gray and the Douglas. The latter is the brightest of all the squirrels I have ever seen, a hot spark of life, making every tree tingle with his prickly toes, a condensed nugget of fresh mountain vigor and valor, as free from disease as a sunbeam. One cannot think of such an animal ever being weary or sick. He seems to think the mountains belong to him, and at first tried to drive away the whole flock of sheep that Muir was tending, as well as the shepherd and the dogs. How he scolds, and what faces he makes, all eyes, teeth, and whiskers. If not so comically small, he would indeed be a dreadful fellow. I should like to know more about his bringing up, his life in the home knothole, as well as in the treetops, throughout all seasons. That's from My First Summer in the Sierra. Now, John Muir didn't read anything by Thoreau until he had been living out in California for a while. Muir did have a chance to meet Ralph Waldo Emerson when the great man visited California in 1871, and soon after that, Muir read Walden and Excursions. And of course, he had to have read the essay Walk-In, because Thoreau's quotes about sauntering show up in Muir's writing as well. And yes, on June 27th, 1861, Henry David Thoreau and John Muir were probably only about 20 or 30 miles away from each other. Wouldn't have known each other at the time at all. Thoreau was heading back to Massachusetts from his trip to Minnesota, crossing southern Wisconsin by train that day. Muir was walking home from Madison to the town of Portage after finishing his first semester at the University of Wisconsin. But that's a story for another day. Of course, with John Muir, we see the beginnings of promotion and advocacy of natural resources. Sierra Club, formed in 1892, John Muir served as its first president. Again, you should already know this story. Go to sierraclub.org for more information, and most states or regions have their own state Sierra Club chapters too. You can find any number of Muir biographies. One that I have at hand is The Pathless Way, John Muir and the American Wilderness by Michael P. Cohen. But if you want more details, look up A Passion for Nature, The Life of John Muir by Donald Worster, W-O-R-S-T-E-R, whom we met last time with the book Nature's Economy. Thank you, Donald. Okay. Moving right along, because we got a lot to cover, is Aldo Leopold. Born in 1887, died in 1948, born in Iowa, and he was one of the earliest trained foresters who graduated from that new program at Yale University. He was assigned to work first in Arizona and New Mexico, and then later to central Wisconsin. What he is most known for is a Sand County Almanac, which is based around his home in Wisconsin. This book is a must-read. If you watch this video today and you see all of these books and you think, how am I ever going to read all of these books? If you have to read just one, it's a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. Okay? Again, as with Muir and the Sierra Club in California, Aldo Leopold's take on nature studies includes an implied and recommended commitment to nature promotion, protection, and advocacy. He referred to it as a land ethic. You should know that there's an Aldo Leopold Foundation based in Baraboo, Wisconsin. You should know that there is an associated Leopold Education Project, which offers a school curriculum that follows every chapter of a Sand County Almanac, and it pulls out themes and asks students to answer questions and gives them activities to do. If you are an educator, you may want to tap into this program. It is very popular in the Midwest, where I first learned about it when I lived in Illinois, but certainly can be used anywhere. So go to aldoleopold.org for more information. Now, you may also find the book Round River from the journals of Aldo Leopold, compiled by his daughter Luna. I think I met one of his daughters at Baraboo at the Shack in the early 2000s when I was taking outdoor teacher education classes at Northern Illinois University. I don't remember if it was Luna or Nina that we met. So let me read from Round River so that I don't ruin the entire experience of Sand County Almanac for you. And this is the conclusion of an essay titled Natural History. Modern natural history deals only incidentally with the identity of plants and animals, and only incidentally with their habits and behaviors. It deals principally with their relations to each other, their relation to the soil and water in which they grow, and their relations to the human beings who sing about my country, but see little or nothing of its inner workings. This new science of relationships is called ecology, but what we call it matters nothing. The question is, does the educated citizen know he is only a cog in an ecological mechanism, that if he will work with that mechanism, his mental wealth and his material wealth can expand indefinitely, but that if he refuses to work with it, it will ultimately grind him to dust? If education does not teach us these things, then what is education for? Conservationists have, I fear, adopted the pedagogical method of the prophets. We mutter darkly about impending doom if people don't mend their ways. The doom is impending, all right. No one can be an ecologist, even an amateur one, without seeing it. But do people mend their ways for fear of calamity? I doubt it. They are more likely to do it out of pure curiosity and interest. That's from Round River. Okay. Aldo Leopold was a well-read person. He had read some of Thoreau's writings when he was younger, and then when he got married, his mother gifted him with a set of Thoreau's journals. How about that? A wedding present. That's pretty cool. The biography you should read, the thick biography you should read, is Aldo Leopold, His Life and Work by Curt Meine. By the way, Aldo Leopold won the John Burroughs Medal for Nature Writing in 1977 with a Sand County Almanac. Moving right along, next we have Sigurd Olson, born in 1899 and died in 1982. Did you think Sigurd Olson would make this list? Do you know Sigurd Olson? If you're from Minnesota or Wisconsin, then you have to. He grew up in northern Wisconsin, but after he went canoeing in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota, he was hooked. He became an explorer, a guide, a protector, and a writer for the Quetico Superior Country, which is really the Quetico Provincial Park of Ontario and the Superior National Forest down in Minnesota. This is where he was based. This is what he most wrote about. And he wrote 9 books, including The Singing Wilderness and Reflections from the North Country. Let's dip into Reflections from the North Country. And this is in a chapter called Timelessness. During a trip into the wilds, it often takes men a week or more to forget the frenetic lives they have led, but inevitably the feeling of timelessness does come, often without warning. I know now, as men accept the time clock of the wilderness, their lives become entirely different. It is one of the great compensations of primitive experience, and when one finally reaches the point where days are governed by daylight and dark rather than by schedules, When one eats if hungry and sleeps when tired and becomes completely immersed in the ancient rhythms, then one begins to live. It is not surprising city dwellers leave their homes each weekend and head for beaches, mountains, or plains where they can recapture the feeling of timelessness. It is this need, as much as scenery or just getting out of town, that is the reason for their escape. In the process, however, they may still be so imbued with the sense of hurry and the thrill of travel that they actually lose what they came to find. Many tour the national parks with the major objective of getting as many park stickers as possible in the short time available, and what would have been a leisurely experience becomes a race to include all the areas within reach. When such travelers return, they are often wearier than when they started. Amen, brother. I see this almost every day in the tourist trap that is Concord, Massachusetts. Earlier in his life, when he wasn't sure what direction he was going to go into, Sigurd Olson sat down with the books of Henry David Thoreau, John Burroughs, and British naturalist William Henry Hudson, and he kept a journal of notes about what he read about the three men. It was a period of deep introspection for him. I'm reading from another book. He read Thoreau and Burroughs and Hudson, not to think about nature, but to think about himself. He looked for similarities between his life and theirs, and between his reactions to nature and civilization and theirs, apparently in an effort to convince himself that if he was similar to them, his destiny must be to follow the less traveled road of the writer, not the thoroughfare of a mainstream career. He was convinced. The three natural philosophers he wrote are akin to me in every action, every thought. Cool. The biography you should read that I just read from is A Wilderness Within, The Life of Sigurd F. Olson by David Backus. You should know that there is a Sigurd Olson Environmental Institute based at Northland College in Ashland, Wisconsin. For more information, go to northland.edu/centers/SOEI. Sigurd Olson won the John Burroughs Medal for nature writing for Wilderness Days, his book, in 1974. Moving right along. Next we have Rachel Carson. We have to have Rachel Carson. Born in 1907, died in 1964. She was born outside of Pittsburgh. She became a marine scientist, a writer, and an editor who worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington, D.C. Many of her books, and one just fell on the floor, many of her books are about the sea. The sea around us just fell on the floor. Okay. Okay. So many of her books are about the sea, but of course, the one that we most know is Silent Spring, which first came out in 1962, controversial at the time, documented the dangers of using DDT, and it forced the banning of it. That's how powerful this book was. Silent Spring is still in print, still bought and read by many folks today. And when it was first published, Rachel Carson herself was becoming a victim of the cancer that would take her life away at a young life, just 2 years later. When Rachel Carson was once asked to compile a bibliography of the best writing in the biological sciences, she included references to Henry David Thoreau and to British naturalist William Henry Hudson, even though they were not strictly considered to be scientists. Rachel is said to have always kept a copy of Walden on her nightstand. Yes, you should read Silent Spring. But if you are an educator in any field, you may want to find a copy of The Sense of Wonder. Here, Rachel describes how she quietly turned on her young nephew Roger to the nature around him. When Roger has visited me in Maine and we have walked in these woods, I have made no conscious effort to name plants or animals, nor to explain to him, but have just expressed my own pleasure in what we see, calling his attention to this or that, but only as I would share discoveries with an older person. Later, I have been amazed at the way names stick in his mind. For when I show color slides of my woods plants, it is Roger who can identify them. Oh, that's what Rachel likes. That's bunchberry. Or, that's juniper, but you can't eat those green berries. They are for the squirrels. I am sure no amount of drill would have implanted the name so firmly as just going through the woods in the spirit of two friends on an expedition of exciting discovery. That's a sense of wonder. A comprehensive biography is Rachel Carson, Witness for Nature by Linda Lear. You should know that there is a Rachel Carson National Wildlife Preserve in Wells, Maine. And by the way, if I can get it here, give me a second. By the way, Rachel Carson won the John Burroughs Medal for The Sea Around Us in 1952. And we move on to Edward Abbey, born in 1927, died in 1989, born in western Pennsylvania in a very small town in Indiana County, spent most of his life in the American West, in New Mexico, Utah, Nevada. A prolific writer of both fiction and nonfiction, best known for Desert Solitaire, A Season in the Wilderness, which is about when he worked at Arches National Monument in Utah. But if you get a chance to read The Monkey Wrench Gang, take it. It's supposed to be a work of fiction, but is it really? Fittingly enough, I don't own a copy of Monkey Wrench Gang, and the only copy available in my large local public library system is the CD set of Monkey Wrench Gang. I have a feeling this is one of those books that gets checked out and never returns to the library shelves. Why? Read it and find out. Edward Abbey's writing tends to ramp advocacy up to a notch to eco-activism and more. And you may also find his book, Down the River, which is a series of essays, a collection of essays. And the very first one is called Down the River with Henry Thoreau. November 4th, 1980. Our river is the Green River in southeast Utah. We load our boats at a place called Mineral Bottom, where prospectors once searched for gold, later for copper, still later for uranium. With little luck. With me are 5 friends, plus the ghost of a 6th. In my ammo can, the river runner's handbag, I carry a worn and greasy paperback copy of a book called Walden or Life in the Woods. Not for 30 years have I looked inside this book. Now, for the first time since my school days, I shall. Thoreau's mind has been haunting mine for most of my life. It seems proper now to reread him. What better place than on this golden river called the Green, in the clear tranquility of November, through the red rock canyons known as Labyrinth, Stillwater, and Cataract, in one of the sweetest, brightest, grandest, and loneliest of primitive regions still remaining in America. Questions. Every statement raises more and newer questions. We shall never be done with questioning so long as men and women remain human. Question authority, reads a bumper sticker I saw the other day in Moab, Utah. Thoreau would doubtless have amended that to read, always question authority. I would add only the word all before the word authority, including, of course, the authority of Henry David himself. Down the river. Do read Desert Solitaire and The Monkey Wrench Gang to learn more about Edward Abbey's life and legacy. You could read Epitaph for a Desert Anarchist, The Life and Legacy of Edward Abbey by James Bishop Jr. And the last of our 7 authors today is Annie Dillard, born in 1945, and she is still with us today. Annie has written a number of fiction and nonfiction books, as well as poetry. The book that she is most known for is Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and the one that I recommend that you read. This is about the time when she lived in a cabin in a valley of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia. Annie won the Pulitzer Prize for this book in 1975. Annie Dillard rarely mentions Henry David Thoreau in her books. It's almost as if she doesn't have to. And yet, I did find a place where she quoted him, and it was in her first book, Tickets for a Prayer Wheel, which is a book of poetry. And she starts each main section with quotes from other people, inspirational ones. She quotes Black Elk and John Muir, among many others. And in part 3, she also quotes Henry David Thoreau. And the quote is, "With all your science, can you tell how it is and whence it is that light comes into the soul?" Ooh. I don't know where that quote comes from, but it's a good one. As for a selection to read you from Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, well, there's no choice here. This first sentence has been with me ever since I read this book, which I don't even know when I read it. But it's in part 2 of chapter 4, which is called The Fixed. Part 2 starts this way. Fish gotta swim and bird gotta fly. Insects, it seems, gotta do one horrible thing after another. I never ask why of a vulture or shark, but I ask why of almost every insect I see. More than one insect, the possibility of fertile reproduction, is an assault on all human value, all hope of a reasonable God. God with a small g. Okay. For a biography, well, that's a little tough. You could read her book on American childhood, where she talks about growing up in Pittsburgh in the 1950s. Many of her books are memoir-like. She calls them narrative nonfiction, including The Writing Life, where you can get glimpses of her life. But I did just find an interesting book, out of print now, called Nature's Kindred Spirits. Aldo Leopold, Joseph Wood Crutch, Edward Abbey, Annie Dillard, and Gary Snyder, by James I. McClintock. It analyzes the writings of all 5 of these writers. 3 of them are on my list. And so you get a little glimpse more of Annie here as compared to all the rest of the people, these people, and the ones that James decided to choose. And I think McClintock comes to the conclusion that Annie Dillard is the most Thoreauvian writer of all of them. In fact, he quotes Edward Abbey saying the same thing. Annie was married to Robert Richardson, notable author of biographies of Thoreau and Emerson and William James, and we just lost Richardson in 2020. I wish he'd written a biography of Annie Dillard. Maybe he did, and we just don't know about it. Fingers crossed. But there you have it, folks. 7 choices of American nature writers who will provide a terrific foundation for you in the realm of nature writing. I heartily recommend all of these books. A full list of titles appears below. Don't be shy about launching into these books either. You already share common ground with these people. You already appreciate the wonders of the natural world and how important it is to all of us. You share that affinity with all of these people, and you also all have already read Henry David Thoreau. I'm Corinne Smith. Thanks for joining me today. Our next video will address a second tier of nature writers that you can continue on your reading journey. Now, before you sit down with any of these books, run outside and play.